At the bank, my daughter handed me a clipboard with a forced smile and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. "Just sign at the yellow tabs, Mom," she said sweetly, but her voice trembled like she knew it wasn't really a request. Her boyfriend stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw tense, like he was ready to step in if I hesitated. I looked down at the papers, heavy with legal jargon I couldn't decipher at a glance, and something inside me tensed like a spring. I'd raised her better than this. Or at least I'd thought I had. "Let me read through this first," I said, buying time while my fingers slipped the note I'd written into the folds of the bank manager's appointment folder. The note was simple. "Not my choice. Please help." It was the only thing I could think to do as I sat there trapped between blood and betrayal. The bank manager glanced at it, blinked once, and then something in the air changed. You're probably wondering how I ended up here, confused, cornered, and clutching at paper scraps like lifelines. 3 months ago, I was just Eleanor Blake, 64, recently retired, and spending my days painting sunflowers in my garage studio in Napa Valley. I lived alone, by choice, in a cozy craftsman cottage my late husband and I had bought 25 years ago. It had wood beams, creaky stairs, and windows that caught morning light like stained glass. I filled the house with music and color, with the smells of oil paint and rosemary bread. It was a good life, quiet but mine. My daughter Lily would visit every few weeks, always in a rush, always with some new story about her tech startup boyfriend and their plans to level up. I never understood half of what she said, but I smiled and nodded, proud that she was ambitious, driven, and independent. I thought we had a healthy distance, close enough to care, far enough to breathe. But I didn't see the slow unraveling that began with one innocuous question. "Mom, do you have a will?" I laughed when she first asked, thinking it was one of those late-night podcasts she'd been listening to about financial planning and generational wealth. "Of course I have a will," I told her, waving a paintbrush in the air like a conductor. "Your dad and I put one together when you were in high school." She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, her mouth twisting in a way I didn't recognize. "It's probably outdated by now," she said lightly, but there was an edge to it, subtle as a paper cut. "Things change. Laws change. You wouldn't want the state deciding what happens to your stuff, right?" I wiped my hands on a rag and narrowed my eyes. "Everything goes to you, sweetheart." "Isn't that what you want?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just making sure," she said, and that was the first crack in the wall of trust between us. I didn't know then that she'd already spoken to a lawyer. The next few weeks felt like a coordinated charm offensive, though I didn't realize it at the time. Lily started dropping by more often, bringing dinner from trendy restaurants and complimenting my hair like she hadn't since college. Her boyfriend Jason started tagging along. Slick, always on his phone, always too friendly. "We just worry about you being alone out here," he'd say, glancing around my home like he was cataloging items for sale. So many stares. "What if you fell and couldn't reach the phone?" I told them I had an Apple Watch with fall detection, but that didn't seem to reassure them. Instead, Lily offered to organize my pills just in case, and installed a new smart lock system I hadn't asked for. "We'll feel better knowing you're safe," she said, but I began to feel less like a mother and more like a case file. I started double-checking that my doors were locked, not against strangers, but against family. It's a strange thing to feel like a guest in your own home. Then came the Sunday brunch where things turned unmistakably serious. Lily handed me a folder filled with printed documents, color-coded with Post-it notes. "It's a power of attorney," she said, as casually as if she were handing me a grocery list. "This just makes things smoother if there's ever an emergency. We can help you pay bills, manage stuff, take care of things." I flipped through the pages slowly, my stomach tightening with every clause. Full financial authority, medical decision-making, real estate transfers. "Who drew this up?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Jason's cousin," she replied too quickly, her cheeks flushing slightly. "He does estate stuff. It's all standard." I looked at her across the table, saw the flicker of impatience behind her polished smile, and knew I couldn't sign. "I'll need my attorney to look at this," I said, and the mood in the room dropped like a stone. After that, the tone of everything shifted. No more surprise dinners or soft reassurances. Just sharp reminders and clipped tones. Lily began pointing out things I forgot. A missed dentist appointment, a double-paid electricity bill, misplacing my keys. "You're not losing it, Mom," she said with fake reassurance, "but you're not as sharp as you used to be." Jason showed me articles about elder scams, slips in cognition, and the importance of having someone young and capable handle your affairs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her when she stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as a burden. But I said nothing, because when love weaponizes concern, it's hard to separate care from control. I began documenting everything. Texts, voicemails, even the times they showed up unannounced. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be with a paintbrush, but they were firm enough to hold a pen. I wrote my note that night, just in case. Jason called the next day and said he'd made a bank appointment. "It's easier if we handle things now, before anything happens. Less stress for you down the road," he said, as though I were already halfway buried. "Lily will pick you up at 10. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a favor. I didn't argue. I knew better by then. Instead, I packed a copy of my will, a photo of my husband, and the note I'd written. "Not my choice. Please help." I folded it neatly and tucked it into my wallet behind my driver's license. If I was going to be treated like a child, I would at least be the kind who knows how to whisper for help. The bank wasn't far, but the drive felt like 100 miles. The bank manager's office was small and sterile, filled with the smell of toner and lavender-scented hand sanitizer. Her nameplate read Angela Ruiz, and her eyes were kind, but cautious. Jason handed her the paperwork with the smug assurance of someone used to closing deals. "Just need her to sign and have it notarized." "All standard," he said, barely glancing at me. I kept my smile neutral and slid the folded note into the papers as Angela took them. She started to flip through, then paused, brows drawing together as she caught sight of the note. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and I gave the smallest nod I could manage. That was the moment the air changed. That was the moment everything began to shift in my favor. If you have a similar story about betrayal from the people you least expect, tell us in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Angela held the note between two fingers like it was a fragile piece of evidence, her expression unreadable. She turned to the computer slowly, typing something with deliberate care while Jason shifted impatiently in his seat. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice oozing faux patience but laced with a threat just beneath. Angela didn't look up as she answered, "Just verifying account details before we proceed." Lily sat beside me, tapping her nails against the armrest, her knee bouncing under the table like a tell in a bad poker game. I kept my gaze on Angela, silently begging her to see me, to really see me beneath the grandmother mask they had assigned me. Jason cleared his throat loudly, trying to reassert control. "We have an appointment with the notary in 20 minutes, so if we could speed this up." Angela finally looked up, her eyes locking with mine again. "Actually, I'll need to speak with Mrs. Blake alone before we finalize anything." Lily blinked, obviously unprepared for this change in protocol, while Jason's jaw tightened visibly. "Why?" he demanded, his voice no longer smooth but sharp with irritation. "Bank policy," Angela said smoothly, rising from her seat and gesturing toward a side office. "When major account authorizations are involved, we conduct a brief verification interview to ensure the primary account holder is acting freely and understands the consequences." Lily turned to me, her smile now stretched taut. "It's just a formality, Mom," she said, her voice forced. "Just tell her you're good with everything." I stood up slowly, my knees cracking like old wood, but I kept my posture straight. Angela placed a light hand on my back, not possessive, but reassuring. "Right this way, Mrs. Blake," she said gently, and I followed her into the smaller office with the weight of every moment pressing into my spine. The second the door closed, Angela locked it with a click that sounded like thunder in my ears. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she knelt beside me and placed the note on the table. "Do you want to tell me what's really going on?" she asked softly, her tone stripped of the customer service glaze. I nodded, throat tight, and began to explain in short, shaky bursts. The pressure, the papers, the gaslighting. Angela listened without interrupting, her dark eyes focused entirely on me, as though every word mattered. "They've been trying to make me feel like I'm losing it," I said, and my voice cracked at the end. "But I'm not. I'm not confused. I know what's happening, and I need help stopping them." Angela reached for a notepad and began writing, every movement precise and calm. "I believe you," she said, and those 3 words landed like a rescue rope tossed into deep water. She explained that financial abuse of elders was more common than most people realized, and that the bank had protocols for these situations. "We can't stop them directly," she clarified, "but we can flag suspicious activity and initiate a review with our legal department." I nodded, my fingers trembling around the edges of my seat. "They've already started taking control," I whispered. "They set up a bank appointment, found a notary, drew up documents, all without my consent." Angela frowned. "Did you sign anything before today?" "No," I said, the words small but firm. "I kept saying I needed time. They didn't like that." Angela sighed, setting down the pen. "Okay, here's what we'll do. I'm going to stall this appointment and call in our compliance officer, quietly." Back in the main office, Jason and Lily were standing now, tension thick, like fog before a storm. Angela stepped out first, her professional smile back in place like armor. "Thank you for your patience," she said smoothly, "but I'm afraid we've run into a slight issue with the system." Jason's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides like he was trying to keep from grabbing the papers off the table. "What kind of issue?" he asked, his voice tight, almost breaking. "A verification hold," Angela replied. "One of the account flags was triggered automatically, so we'll need to complete internal reviews before proceeding." Lily's face twisted, her voice rising. "That's ridiculous. We're just trying to help our mother." Angela's eyes didn't waver. "And our systems are designed to ensure all parties are making choices without pressure." I sat back down in my original seat, heart racing, but my face blank. Let them stew. Let them reveal themselves. Jason tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Look, Angela, I don't know what Eleanor told you, but she's been under a lot of stress lately." He turned to me, his voice suddenly warm and patronizing. "Right, Mom? You've been feeling overwhelmed, haven't you?" I looked at him squarely, took a breath, and said, "I've been feeling manipulated." Lily gasped, and Jason's fake smile cracked open into a snarl. "Excuse me?" he said, stepping toward me, but Angela moved between us, her shoulders squared. "Sir, if you raise your voice again, I'll have to ask you to leave the premises." The temperature in the room dropped like a stone tossed into a frozen lake. "You're making a huge mistake," Jason said, glaring now. "We're just trying to make things easier." Angela tilted her head. "For who?" They left in a fury, Jason muttering under his breath while Lily threw one last, wounded glance over her shoulder. Angela stayed beside me as they stormed out of the bank, watching them until they were out of sight. "They'll be back," I said quietly, suddenly exhausted. "Probably with more pressure, more tactics." "This isn't over." Angela nodded, then handed me a card. "Our legal department will follow up with you tomorrow, and if anything happens before then, call me directly." I looked at the card, then at her, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. "Thank you," I said. "You're welcome," she replied, and I saw the steel beneath her kindness. Outside, the sun had shifted behind a thick veil of clouds, casting long shadows along the sidewalk as I walked slowly toward the corner bench. My legs felt hollow, my fingers cold despite the warm air, and I realized I'd been holding my breath since we left the office. I sat down on the bench, clutching the business card like a lifeline, while people walked past me unaware that something vital had just been preserved. Somewhere across town, Jason was likely already making calls, recalibrating their strategy, adjusting the narrative. Lily would cry, of course. She always cried when things didn't go her way, and I used to fall for it, but not anymore. I took out my phone and scrolled to Robert's number. My lawyer, someone I hadn't contacted in over a year. My thumb hovered for a second, then pressed call. It rang twice before he answered. "Robert, it's Eleanor. We need to talk." If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. Robert answered with the same calm voice I remembered, measured and grounded. like the sound of a well-built fence keeping chaos at bay. "Eleanor," he said, his tone shifting the moment he recognized the stress in my silence. "I think I'm being railroaded," I told him, staring at the sidewalk as people bustled past, oblivious. "By your daughter and her boyfriend?" he asked, already putting pieces together with the speed of someone who's seen this before. "Yes," I whispered, the word a confession and a release. "They tried to get me to sign control of everything, my accounts, my house, even my medical decisions." I told him about the note, about Angela, about the cold efficiency in Jason's behavior. "I haven't signed anything, but I don't think they're done." "They're not," Robert said plainly. "Come to my office first thing tomorrow morning, and Eleanor, don't speak to them again until we've set protections in place." I spent the rest of that day in a kind of daze, a strange stillness washing over me like my brain was trying to seal cracks in the foundation. At home, the silence felt louder than usual. Not peaceful like it had been, but uncertain and watching. I turned off the smart lock Jason had installed and re-engaged the old deadbolt, the sound of metal sliding into place oddly comforting. I made tea out of habit, but it went cold, untouched, the steam vanishing before I took a sip. My eyes kept drifting to the window, half expecting Lily's car to pull up with another sugary sweet surprise visit. Instead, only the wind moved outside, rustling the lavender bushes Tom and I had planted after our second anniversary. He would have seen through Jason in 5 minutes. He never liked charm that came too easy, always said it was a poor mask for greed. I missed him fiercely in that moment, like grief had just knocked on the door for the first time. "I wish you were here," I said aloud to the empty kitchen, "because they don't see me anymore." The next morning, I was at Robert's office by 8:15, 10 minutes early, carrying a folder full of every letter, email, and printout I'd saved. He greeted me at the door himself, his gray suit neat, his expression stern but not unkind. "Come in," he said, holding the door with one hand and gesturing toward a chair with the other. The office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper, and the windows let in a filtered light that made everything feel more manageable. I handed him the folder, and he opened it without a word, flipping through with the quiet focus of someone looking for buried traps. "They'd been building a case," I said, my voice thin but steady, "making me seem forgetful, unsteady, like I'm a risk to myself." Robert nodded without looking up. "They want control, not out of concern, but out of convenience and entitlement. The fact that you resisted makes you a problem they now want to remove." I swallowed hard and looked at the photo of his wife and children on his desk, wondering if he ever feared they'd do the same. Robert spent the next hour explaining a plan to me, methodical and thorough, using terms that both reassured and terrified me. "We'll establish a durable power of attorney, but under your terms," he said, outlining the legal protections in a document thicker than a magazine. "We'll place your assets into a revocable living trust that names a neutral successor trustee, someone you trust, not family." He paused, then added, "That way, if something truly does happen to you down the road, no one can swoop in under the pretense of love." I nodded, my fingers digging into the hem of my sleeve. "We also need to document your current mental capacity," he continued. "I'll refer you to a psychologist I've worked with. She specializes in elder advocacy assessments." "You think they're going to try to declare me unfit?" I said. "I think they already are," Robert replied, his voice low. "And if they are, we need to be 6 steps ahead." My stomach dropped, but I nodded. "Then let's get ahead." That night, I didn't sleep much, too wired from the what-ifs, spinning like leaves in a storm. I lay in bed with the light on, my legal documents now locked in my bedroom safe, and Robert's contact information programmed into my phone twice. Around 2 a.m., I heard a noise on the porch, just a scuff, like someone shifting their weight. I got up slowly, not flipping the porch light yet, and looked through the peephole. No one. But the shadow of footprints on the dew-covered mat was fresh. I didn't call the police. Nothing technically happened, and fear without evidence was just paranoia. Still, I wrote it down in my journal, including the time and the exact weather, as Robert had advised. "No one gets to call me forgetful again," I muttered, heart-thudding. I went back to bed with the porch light on this time. The following afternoon, I met with Dr. Halpern, the psychologist Robert had referred me to, An elegant woman with salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything twice. Her office was warm, with mismatched chairs and watercolor prints that looked like they'd been painted by clients. She greeted me like I was her neighbor, not a project, and the air in the room eased a little. "I'm here to help you document what you already know," she said gently, offering me tea. "That you're fully capable of managing your own life." We talked for nearly 2 hours, not just about memory and cognition, but about emotions, fears, and betrayal. She asked questions I hadn't expected. About Tom, about Lily as a child, about the moment I stopped feeling safe. At the end of the session, she gave me a nod that felt almost ceremonial. "You're clear, sharp, and competent," she said. "Whatever your daughter's claiming, it doesn't match what I see here." When I got home from that appointment, Lily was parked in my driveway, leaning against the hood of her car like she owned the place. My heart sank, but I squared my shoulders and got out of mine slowly, locking it before approaching. "You haven't returned my calls," she said, arms crossed, trying to look wounded but coming off annoyed. "I've been busy," I replied, unlocking the front door but not opening it. "Busy seeing lawyers?" she asked, and there was venom in her voice now, no more sugar. "I think you know exactly what I've been doing," I said, voice flat. "Why didn't you just talk to me first?" "Because every time I did, you turned it into a performance of concern instead of a conversation." Her eyes welled up with tears, but I had no patience left for weaponized weeping. "You don't know what you're doing, Mom," she whispered. "That's what scares me. I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "And it scares you because you don't have control over it." She didn't follow me into the house, though I half expected her to, like a toddler pushing against a closed door. I locked it behind me and leaned against the wall, feeling both strong and hollow, like a steel beam left standing after a building falls. I watched from the living room window as she sat in her car for a while before finally driving away. Robert had warned me that this would get harder before it got easier, and I believed him now more than ever. The war wasn't over, just paused, waiting for the next move. I wasn't naive enough to think she'd give up. Jason definitely wouldn't. He was the one with the most to gain, and he was too polished to quit while the game still had pieces on the board. I sat down and opened my laptop, checking my accounts, still untouched, still safe for now. My trust documents were scanned and backed up, my passwords updated, my walls reinforced. Let them come. I was ready. 2 days later, Jason called from an unknown number and left a voicemail that started friendly but frayed at the edges. "Hi, Eleanor. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing," he began, but there was tension in his voice like piano wire pulled too tight. "We're a little concerned after what happened at the bank, but we know it was just a misunderstanding." He paused, then added, "Lily's been upset, and I think she just wants to talk." He didn't mention the documents, the pressure, or the notary, waiting outside like a vulture on a fence. He was recalibrating, trying a new angle since force hadn't worked. "Let's get coffee," he said, casual as if we were friends. "Just you and me, no pressure, just to clear the air." He ended the call with an awkward laugh that didn't quite mask the warning underneath. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Robert with a note. He's changing tactics. By Friday, a bouquet of yellow tulips arrived at my doorstep with no card, but I didn't need one to know who sent them. Jason always brought yellow tulips to Lily's performances in college, calling them her victory flowers. It was a clever move, gentle, symbolic, something they could later claim was an act of goodwill. I took a photo of them for my records and dropped them in the compost bin, watching as petals collapsed into damp coffee grounds. Then I checked the motion camera I'd had installed the week before. No one had rung the bell. Whoever delivered them had done so quietly, probably while I was out back, hoping to create the illusion of kindness without accountability. I wasn't falling for it. Not now. Not after what they'd already tried to do. The emotional whiplash was dizzying. One day coercion, the next day contrition. But there was no apology, no ownership of their actions, only gestures designed to destabilize me. I'd seen enough charm, used as a weapon, to recognize it when it knocked softly at my door. The next day, Angela from the bank called with an update that stiffened my spine. "We completed our internal review, and I've escalated the incident to our legal team," she said. "They agree there were signs of undue influence and coercion during your appointment." She paused, letting the gravity settle. "The footage has been archived and attached to the elder abuse report filed with our compliance division." I thanked her, and she added, "We've also placed alerts on your accounts. Any joint authorization changes will trigger a freeze and require in-person confirmation from you only." I felt a wave of relief, the kind that doesn't make you smile but lets you sleep a little deeper. "You did the right thing," she said softly before hanging up. I believed her, but I also knew how determined Jason was. For him, this wasn't about what was right, it was about what he believed was owed to him. I had interrupted a plan, and men like Jason didn't take interruptions lightly. That evening, I dug out old photos from the attic and sat cross-legged in the living room, flipping through decades of forgotten smiles and familiar faces. There were pictures of Lily at 5 in a pink tutu, one hand on her hip and the other tangled in curls she hadn't yet learned to tame. A shot of Tom holding her on his shoulders at the county fair, cotton candy staining her cheeks. I found the one of all three of us on the front porch the day she got her college acceptance letter. Tom had tears in his eyes, and Lily looked like she owned the world. I traced their outlines with my fingers, my throat tight. When had the girl in these photos decided I was an obstacle instead of a mother? Had I missed the moment she'd stopped seeing me as someone to protect and started seeing me as someone to manage? I didn't have an answer. Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was a slow erosion. Love, once unshakable, weathered into something transactional. The photos didn't lie, but they didn't explain either. Sunday morning, I woke to an email titled "Urgent Family Discussion," sent from Lily's account but written in Jason's clipped, professional tone. It was 3 paragraphs long, filled with legal jargon and framed concern, urging me to meet with a third-party mediator they'd selected. "This isn't about control," it read. "It's about ensuring your safety, peace of mind, and the seamless management of your legacy." Legacy, another word used like a leash. They proposed a meeting at a neutral office, offered transportation, and even included a draft itinerary. It reeked of coercion, dressed in good intentions, like a spider inviting the fly to tea. I printed the email and gave it to Robert the next morning, who frowned before reading it twice. "They're testing boundaries again," he said. "Trying to pull you back into their version of reasonable." "I won't go," I told him firmly. "And I don't want to respond." "Good," he said, marking something in his file. "Let them wonder." Later that week, I finally heard from someone I hadn't expected. My sister Miriam, who lived 2 states away and rarely called unless someone was born or dying. "Elle," she said, skipping pleasantries, "why is Lily calling me asking about your health?" I exhaled slowly, unsurprised but still hollowed out by the confirmation. "Because she wants to make it seem like I'm losing it," I said. "She told me you were having episodes, confusing dates, repeating stories, forgetting where you put things." "I'm not," I replied, keeping my voice level. "She and Jason are trying to paint a narrative so they can take over my finances." Miriam was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you want me to come up there?" I nearly cried at that, at the thought of someone who wanted to show up without an agenda. "No, not yet," I said. "But thank you. That means more than you know." By Thursday, Robert had finalized the trust paperwork and filed a cease and desist order against Lily and Jason, citing emotional harassment and attempted financial exploitation. "It's not a permanent protection," he said, sliding the signed papers across the desk toward me, "but it sends a clear message. If they continue, they'll face consequences." The documents were thick, crisp, and unambiguous, pages and pages of legal muscle drawn up in my name. I held the pen firmly, signing each page with the steady hand of a woman reclaiming something that had never truly been lost. "You've done well," Robert said, and for once I believed him. I hadn't let the shame silence me, hadn't let fear shrink me. I was still Eleanor Blake, still the woman who once ran an art gallery, still the woman who stood by her husband through cancer, still the mother who raised a daughter with everything she had. They wanted me to be helpless. Instead, I had become something far more dangerous. Prepared. That weekend, The silence from Lily and Jason was not comforting. It was strategic. They had gone quiet before, but this time it felt like a retreat before a siege, a pause filled with calculation. I knew them well enough to recognize that silence didn't mean surrender. It meant planning. On Sunday afternoon, I received a call from Miriam again, her voice sharp and laced with disbelief. "Jason called me," she said without greeting, "and tried to convince me you were being manipulated by some ambulance-chasing attorney." I sat down slowly, letting the words settle, feeling the weight of the new tactic. "They're trying to discredit everyone around me," I said, more to myself than to her. "First it was my memory, now it's my lawyer." Miriam was furious. "I told him to stay the hell out of my phone and out of your life." "Thank you," I said, and meant it with everything I had. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, an administrator from Golden Haven Residential Living. "Hello, Mrs. Blake," the woman said in a polite but brisk tone. "We're confirming your scheduled tour for Wednesday at 10 a.m. Jason and Lily mentioned you're considering a transition and asked us to prepare some welcome materials." My chest constricted as I replayed it, bile rising at the assumption behind her words. I had never called Golden Haven, never even heard of it until that moment. They were laying the groundwork for something I hadn't agreed to, again. The language was careful, but the message was clear. They were moving forward, with or without me. I forwarded the voicemail to Robert, who called back 10 minutes later. "This is no longer just posturing," he said. "They're trying to create a paper trail of consent. We need to act now." By Wednesday morning, Robert had filed a temporary injunction blocking any third-party admissions, tours, or medical evaluations arranged by Lily or Jason. "They're going to be furious," I said, signing the final page of the motion with deliberate force. "Let them be," he replied. "It's better to face anger than control disguised as love." I called Golden Haven myself and spoke with the administrator, calmly explaining that any future scheduling without my consent would result in legal action. She stammered an apology and promised to update their records immediately. "I'm not confused," I told her, "and I don't need a facility. I need space from people who want to put me in one for their own convenience." When I hung up, I stared at the quiet phone, half expecting it to ring again, but the silence that followed was finally my own. That afternoon, Angela called to check in, her voice a welcome familiarity in the chaos of false concern. "Our legal department received confirmation of your injunction," she said. "And just so you know, your daughter attempted to access your account online this morning." I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "She doesn't have my login," I said. "She tried to reset the password using your old email," Angela clarified. "But our system blocked the attempt and flagged the account." "Thank you," I whispered, throat tightening with both anger and gratitude. "We've documented everything and added another security layer to your profile." "Do you think this will stop them?" I asked, unsure if I wanted to hear the answer. Angela hesitated before saying no, but it makes it a lot harder for them to win. I hung up and updated my password again anyway. That evening, I received a text from Lily, just one sentence, but it landed like a blade. "I hope you're happy creating all this drama." No greeting, no explanation, no context, just blame wrapped in accusation. I didn't respond. I saved the message, took a screenshot, and added it to the file I kept near the front door in case anything escalated suddenly. I knew what this was. She wanted a reaction, a reply she could twist into evidence of instability, emotion, or irrationality. But silence, when chosen, is a power of its own. I sat on the porch as the sun went down, holding a mug of tea I hadn't touched, watching shadows stretch across the lavender bushes. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, and I thought about the little girl Lily once was, curious, joyful, wild with dreams. I didn't know where that girl had gone, or if she was ever coming back. On Thursday, Robert called with a tone in his voice I hadn't heard before, urgent but measured. "I've just received word that Lily and Jason are petitioning for guardianship," he said. "They're claiming mental decline, citing unspecified episodes and erratic behavior." My breath caught as I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. "On what basis?" I asked. "No doctor has evaluated me. No one has seen me confused." That's why it won't hold, he said. But they're hoping for a fast-track judge who will grant temporary guardianship pending evaluation. Which would mean, I said, the words tasting sour, they could move me against my will. Yes, Robert confirmed. But we're going to beat them to it. Friday morning, we filed a preemptive affidavit of mental competency, attaching Dr. Halpern's evaluation and video statements she had recorded during my assessment. We submitted notarized declarations from Angela at the bank, Miriam, and even my neighbor Greg, who regularly saw me managing my home and garden. This establishes a timeline and a wall, Robert explained. They can scream decline all they want, but it won't erase documented evidence of your stability. I nodded, heart pounding beneath the surface but masked by a calm I didn't quite feel. What about the court date? I asked. You'll receive a formal notice next week, he said. But we've already requested a hearing with a judge who specializes in elder rights. Good, I said. Let's bring all of it out into the light. That's the plan, Robert said. We're not hiding, we're proving. That night, I opened the safe in my closet and stared at the thick folder that had become my shield. Emails, letters, voicemail transcripts, photos, statements. Proof of who I was and who they were trying to make me appear to be. I wondered what Tom would think if he were here, if he'd be proud or just heartbroken. He always said people show their truest selves not in crisis, but in the pursuit of advantage. I never imagined our daughter would become the person he warned me about. I closed the safe gently and sat in the armchair near the window, letting the quiet settle around me. I was tired, yes, but not defeated. My life, my name, my mind, these things were still mine, and I intended to keep them. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. Monday came with an overcast sky and the heaviness of anticipation hanging in the air like fog. I was scheduled to receive the official court notice that day, but it was the unexpected visitor at 10:17 a.m. that rattled me more than any envelope could. Jason stood on my porch in a pressed blue shirt, no tie, holding a grocery bag like we were friendly neighbors. He knocked twice, then leaned slightly to one side, as if trying to peer through the frosted glass pane beside the door. I watched him through the peephole, pulse pounding, my fingers gripping the deadbolt like it was a lifeline. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. After a moment, he set the bag down gently and spoke toward the door. "We just want to talk, Eleanor," he said. "Lily is really hurting, and we're worried about you." I backed away slowly, phone in hand, taking a photo of him standing there. Let them keep pretending this was about love. My paper trail would show otherwise. The grocery bag sat untouched for hours until I finally opened it with latex gloves and caution. Inside were items clearly chosen for impact rather than necessity. A loaf of artisan bread, a jar of imported jam, herbal tea in a floral tin, and a handwritten card. The card read, "Thought you might like some of your favorites. Hoping we can find our way back to each other." I recognized the handwriting as Lily's. Rounded and clean, unchanged since childhood spelling tests. I didn't cry, but my chest ached in a way that almost made me wish I could. I took pictures of everything, documenting the gesture like another line in a ledger. Then I tossed the food in the trash and placed the card in the growing file labeled manipulation. I knew their rhythm now. Push hard, back off, bait the hook with tenderness, and reel me back in. But I wasn't biting anymore. I had finally learned to recognize the difference between peace offerings and power plays. On Wednesday, the court notice arrived via certified mail, the envelope thick and official with the seal of the county clerk. I opened it calmly, eyes scanning each line for lies and distortions, knowing they would be buried somewhere in the legal language. The petition from Lily and Jason claimed I had exhibited signs of cognitive disorientation, referencing, quote, multiple reported instances of forgetting appointments and misplacing medication. No dates, no witnesses, just vague implications and careful half-truths wrapped in legal formality. They requested emergency guardianship, citing, quote, urgent concern for Eleanor Blake's safety and decision-making capacity. I read it twice, then a third time, the way you'd reread an obituary, trying to understand how someone you knew became someone else's memory. I wasn't surprised anymore, only deeply, profoundly tired. I emailed the scanned document to Robert and waited for the ward to move into the courtroom. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at 9:30 a.m. sharp, and Robert cleared his weekend to prepare. "We're going to respond aggressively," he told me over the phone. "No playing nice anymore." I met him Saturday afternoon at his office, where he'd assembled a binder the size of a phone book filled with declarations, assessments, timestamps, and audio recordings. "They want to turn your silence into proof of decline," he said. "We're going to turn their pressure into proof of abuse." He had highlighted portions of Dr. Halpern's evaluation and cross-referenced Angela's report with the flagged bank activity. "The strength of our case is that we're not just saying no, we're proving why your no means no." I nodded slowly, heart thudding in my chest. I'd always believed truth would be enough. Now I understood it needed armor. Sunday evening, Miriam arrived unannounced, a duffel bag in one hand and a determined look in her eye. "I'm not letting you walk into that courtroom alone," she said, brushing past me like she belonged in the hallway of my life again. "You don't have to testify," I told her. "You've already signed your declaration." She dropped her bag and turned to me, arms crossed. "I'm here because I need to be," she said, "and because, if this happened to me, I know you'd show up." The honesty hit me like a splash of cold water, and I pulled her into a hug that felt like forgiveness in motion. We hadn't always been close. Distance, time, and pride had gotten in the way, but right now none of that mattered. "Thank you," I whispered into her shoulder. "Let's make sure they see exactly who you are," she replied. And for once I believed someone was truly on my side. The courthouse was beige and cold, the kind of building designed to intimidate you into silence before you ever stepped inside. Robert met us at the front with his briefcase and a calming nod, his confidence a balm against my nerves. Jason and Lily were already in the lobby, dressed for sympathy, her in a pale cardigan, him in a tailored suit and forced humility. They didn't speak to me. They didn't have to. Their glances said enough, full of practiced concern and righteous indignation. "They're going to perform," Robert whispered as we waited for the bailiff to call us in. "Let them. The judge has read everything already." My hands were cold, but my voice was steady when I answered, "I'm ready." And I meant it, even if my knees weren't sure yet. Inside the courtroom, the judge was a woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for hating waste, of time, of resources, of patience. She glanced at the file before her, and then at us, her gaze landing on me for a long, quiet moment. "We're here today to review the emergency guardianship petition filed by Lily Hayes and Jason Mendez," she said. "We'll hear from the petitioners first." Lily stood, voice soft and cracking just enough to sound sincere, and spoke about confusion, fear, and watching a loved one disappear in front of you. Jason added statistics, cited elder fraud, mentioned fall risks and his professional experience in, quote, crisis planning. They painted a picture with blurry edges, a woman losing her grip in need of rescue. I didn't interrupt. I let them finish their story. Then it was our turn. Robert stood and calmly began dismantling their claims, with quiet precision, layer by layer, document by document. Dr. Halpern's evaluation, conducted 3 weeks ago, shows no cognitive decline, he said, holding up the signed report. Bank officer Angela Ruiz documented an incident of coercion during a notarization attempt. Video evidence is available. He handed the judge copies of emails, transcriptions of voicemails, and records of unauthorized facility appointments. "This is not concern," Robert said. "This is a pattern of manipulation designed to gain control of Ms. Blake's assets and medical authority under false pretenses." I looked at the judge, who was reading intently, her lips pressed in a hard line. "Mrs. Blake," she said finally, "do you wish to say anything for the record?" I stood, took a breath, and said yes. I wish to live my life without being managed like a broken object. The courtroom was so silent after I spoke that I could hear the sound of my own breathing. The judge didn't speak right away, just stared at me, like she was weighing my words against every form, transcript, and piece of paper in front of her. I stood still, heart pounding but face calm, refusing to shrink in the presence of the people who had tried to erase me. "Thank you, Mrs. Blake," the judge said finally, her voice neutral but firm. "Please remain standing." She turned to Lily and Jason, who were sitting tensely at their table, fingers interlocked in what I now knew was a practiced display of unity. "Petitioners," the judge continued, You've submitted no medical documentation to support your claim of cognitive decline. Your concerns appear rooted in subjective interpretation and unsupported allegations. Lily's mouth opened slightly, but Jason placed a hand on her knee under the table. The court finds no evidence to justify emergency guardianship, the judge concluded. Petition denied. I exhaled slowly, a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for weeks, maybe months. Robert gently touched my elbow and motioned for me to sit, but I stayed standing for a beat longer. Not in defiance, but in reclamation. Lily looked stunned, eyes darting between me and the judge like the verdict had betrayed her personally. Jason's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, folding the papers in front of him with mechanical precision. "This isn't over," Lily muttered under her breath as I passed their table, her voice sharp and full of heat. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who still didn't understand that my autonomy wasn't hers to manage. Miriam gave me a smile from the bench, proud and fierce, like an older sister watching her sibling win a long, dirty fight. Outside the courtroom, the sun had broken through the clouds, and for the first time in weeks, I let it warm my face without fear. I was still standing, my name, my mind, my life intact. Back at home, I opened the windows and let the breeze sweep through the house, carrying away the stale air and the tension that had clung to every surface. I made coffee the way I liked it, strong, hot, without anyone questioning whether I remembered how. Miriam stayed the night again, claiming the guest room like it was hers by birthright, which, in a way, it was. "I don't know how you stayed so calm," she said over breakfast, slicing a grapefruit with the same precision I'd seen her use in arguments as kids. "I wasn't calm," I said honestly. "I was furious, but fury is a lot quieter when it's patient." She nodded, respect etched in the lines of her face. "Well, whatever it was, you scared the hell out of them." "Good," I said, buttering my toast. "Maybe now they'll think twice before trying to steal someone's life in broad daylight." Robert called that afternoon with follow-up details and some words I'd never expected to hear. The judge added a note in the court record that the petition appeared retaliatory. He said, "It's not legally binding, but it carries weight if they try anything again." I leaned against the kitchen counter, eyes closed, letting the information settle over me like armor. "So we're in the clear?" I asked, cautious. "Legally? Yes," Robert replied. "Emotionally? I doubt it." He paused before continuing. "Eleanor, this kind of manipulation rarely ends with the first defeat. They'll try a softer approach next. Something public. Something that looks like reconciliation but masks the same intent." I knew he was right. It wasn't over. But at least now, I was prepared for the next performance. 2 days later, I got the first sign of what Robert had warned me about, a Facebook post from Lily, vague but pointed, with a photo of us from 5 years ago and a caption that read, "Sometimes people you love push you away when they need help the most." The comments flooded in from her friends, co-workers, and acquaintances, offering sympathy, confusion, and misplaced comfort. "You're such a good daughter," one wrote. "She'll come around. Just give her time." Another commented, "Elder care is so hard. No one really understands unless they've done it." My stomach turned. Not at the post itself, but at the deliberate rewriting of reality in plain sight. She wasn't just grieving the court decision, she was painting a new narrative, one where she was the victim. I didn't respond. I didn't post. But I took screenshots, timestamped every comment, and forwarded the post to Robert just the same. Miriam offered to go nuclear, post the court verdict, the abuse allegations, the video stills from the bank, and for a moment I was tempted. But then I remembered what Angela had said weeks earlier. "Let them talk. You'll still have the truth." I didn't want to become a public spectacle, a cautionary tale twisted for digital sympathy. What I wanted was peace. What I needed was to make sure Lily and Jason didn't get another chance to pry into my life. So I met with Robert again to draft a permanent no-contact directive, binding not just through social expectation but legally enforceable. He included provisions for inheritance revision, revocation of access, and immediate action if they attempted anything under a new guise. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "You don't have to make this final." "They made it final," I said, signing the last page without hesitation. "I'm just catching up." After the paperwork was filed, I sat in the garden and watched a pair of blue jays squabble over space in the bird bath. The rosemary had bloomed again, small purple flowers spreading through the evergreen needles like quiet confetti. Tom would have loved this morning, I thought. Coffee, birdsong, the weight of sunlight on his shoulders as he read the paper. I missed him differently now, not with desperation, but with gratitude for how uncomplicated his love had been. He never questioned my judgment, never tried to edit my life for convenience. He would have hated what Lily had become, and I was finally ready to admit that out loud. "You'd be proud of me," I whispered, watching the blue jays settle into truce. I didn't let them take me apart. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it was true. 2 weeks passed without contact, and I let the silence stretch, wary of the quiet but grateful for the breathing room. Miriam returned home to Nevada, promising to visit again soon, and leaving behind a batch of her famous lemon bars as edible backup. I spent my mornings painting again, brush to canvas, letting color and texture say things words could not. The tension in my shoulders began to ease, though not completely, not yet. Every time the phone rang or a car slowed near the driveway, my heart still flinched before reason caught up. Trauma teaches you to rehearse disasters, even when the sky is clear. I busied myself with the things I'd always loved: my garden, my books, the small rituals of independence. No one asked what pills I was taking. No one stood behind me with a clipboard in concern. I began to feel like myself again, whole and unobserved. But peace, I'd learned, is not the same as safety. It can be broken without warning, and it was. On a sunny Thursday morning, a knock came at the door that didn't feel like delivery or neighborly drop-in. I checked the peephole and saw a man in a blazer with a clipboard, standing beside a woman in a nurse's scrubs. I didn't open the door. Instead, I slid the window open an inch and asked, "Can I help you?" The man looked up and smiled too quickly. "Mrs. Blake? We're here from Golden Haven. We received confirmation from your daughter that today was a good time for a wellness check and pre-assessment." I blinked, stunned, fury tightening like a knot in my chest. "I didn't request anything," I said flatly, "and I'm not interested in any assessments." The nurse glanced nervously at the man who adjusted his stance. "We understand," he said, voice still in performance mode. "But under the Elder Outreach Program, family-initiated wellness checks are permitted if cognitive decline has been previously documented." My jaw clenched as I opened the screen a little farther, just enough to let my voice sharpen. There has been no documentation of decline. In fact, there is court documentation disproving it. He blinked, clearly not expecting resistance, while the nurse looked increasingly uncomfortable. "If you don't leave my property in 30 seconds, I'll be calling both the police and my attorney, and I'll be pressing trespassing charges for unauthorized entry under false pretenses." The nurse tugged on his arm. "Let's go," she muttered. "This isn't going to be worth it." They left without another word, but I stood there, pulse hammering, hand still clenched around the frame of the window like it could break. I called Robert before I even sat down, relaying every detail as precisely as I could. "This is a violation," he said immediately, his voice tight. "They're testing limits again. New methods, same motive." "How can they still access these places?" I asked. "I thought we cut that off." "We did," he replied, "but they're working loopholes, soft entries, informal programs that don't require medical authority, just familial assertion. So they can't legally act, but they can try to scare me into thinking they can." "Exactly," Robert said. "It's posturing. Desperate, but still dangerous if it causes confusion or panic." "I'm not confused," I said, slowly, purposefully. "I'm done being scared." By that evening, Robert had contacted Golden Haven directly and issued a formal cease and desist on any future communication, visits, or services initiated in my name without my express, written consent. "They won't try that route again," he told me. "They'll move to public sympathy or indirect messaging next. Expect more social media subtweets, maybe community rumors." He was right. The next morning, an old friend from church called to say she'd heard I was struggling to manage things and asked if I needed a ride to the store. I thanked her kindly and told her I was doing fine, but the ache in my chest was familiar now, betrayal echoing through secondhand whispers. I knew where the rumors came from. They always came from the same place. Lily didn't need legal authority when she could crowdsource pity, but I'd been alone long enough to know how to trust myself again. I went to the store, bought my groceries, and waved at 3 people along the way. Let them wonder. That weekend, Angela called with a different kind of update, one that hit me harder than I expected. We've flagged 3 separate attempts to access your banking info from an out-of-state IP address, she said. Each time they failed, but it's clear someone's trying to breach. Do you know where from? I asked, although I had a sinking suspicion. Nevada, she said. Las Vegas area. My mouth went dry. Jason's brother lived in Nevada. We've added multi-level authentication, biometric re-verification, and geolocking, she assured me. Nothing's getting through, but I wanted you to know. Thank you, I said quietly. You keep saving me before I even ask. Angela laughed softly. No, Mrs. Blake. You saved yourself. We're just your backup. I didn't sleep much that night, lying awake and staring at the ceiling while the house creaked around me. I thought about Lily as a baby, how she used to curl against me like I was the whole world. I thought about the first time she lied to me, age 7, when she broke the ceramic rabbit in the garden and said the wind did it. I thought about when she told me she loved me last, really loved me, not used the word like a transaction. I wondered if she remembered it. I wondered if she ever meant it. The thing about memory is that it isn't just a test of recall. It's a record of trust, a ledger of the promises made and broken. My memory hadn't failed me. If anything, it had saved me. I remembered exactly who she used to be, and I finally understood who she had become. On Monday morning, I got a letter in the mail. Not legal, not official, just cream-colored stationery in Lily's handwriting. I almost didn't open it, but something made me sit down at the table and unfold the page. Mom, I miss you. I know you're angry, but we were just scared. You've always been so strong, and it's hard watching you get older. Jason might have pushed too hard, but he only wanted to help. We didn't mean to make you feel small. We just wanted to make sure you were okay. Please call me. Love, Lily. There were no apologies, only justifications. No ownership, just repackaged concern, soft words dressed as surrender. I placed the letter in the same file with everything else, the banknote, the legal filings, the social media posts. One day, maybe I'd read it again, maybe not. I wasn't interested in what she wanted me to feel. I was interested in what she'd done. And what I had done, finally, fully, was protect myself. On Tuesday morning, I walked to the post office, mailing a package Robert had prepared. Copies of all cease and desist orders, court transcripts, and identity verification notices, this time addressed directly to Jason's employer. He's not going to stop, Robert had warned me the day before. But people like Jason care a great deal about how they're perceived in their professional lives. I didn't do it to ruin him. I did it to draw a line he could see from wherever he was scheming next. The post office clerk didn't ask questions, just weighed the envelope and slid it into the bin behind the counter. I walked out into the sun, the warmth on my shoulders feeling less like luck and more like survival. The bakery down the block was offering apple tarts, and I bought one for no reason, except that I wanted it. I wasn't celebrating anything, not officially, but there was something sacred about claiming joy without permission. I ate it on the bench outside the library, watching a golden retriever try to carry a stick twice its length across the sidewalk. That afternoon, I received a call from the director of Golden Haven herself, a woman named Marcia Langston, whose voice was the precise tone of corporate apology. Mrs. Blake, I'm calling to personally apologize for the recent wellness visit arranged under your name, she said. Our protocols were manipulated, and your concerns were absolutely valid. She explained they'd completed a full internal review and revised intake procedures to prevent future abuse of third-party recommendations. I've also flagged your name across all our systems with a hard consent requirement, she added. Only you may initiate contact. No exceptions. I thanked her, and for a moment I wondered if she was genuinely appalled or just trying to avoid litigation. Either way, the result was the same. Another door closed to Lily and Jason's intrusion. We failed you, Marcia said softly, right before we hung up. Yes, I replied, not bitter, just honest. But I'm not used to staying failed. I spent the next few days sorting through closets, something I hadn't done in years, not really. Old boxes held photographs, scraps of Tom's notes, worn baby shoes, and letters I'd written but never sent. I found a framed poem Lily gave me in ninth grade, something she'd written herself for a Mother's Day project. "You are the roots that hold me steady," it read in glitter pen. "Even when I want to fly." I sat with it for a long time, unsure whether to weep or laugh at the contrast between then and now. I placed it on my bedroom dresser, not out of nostalgia, but out of truth. She had been that girl once. I had been that mother once. Now we were two people who had walked in opposite directions, neither quite willing to admit the road back might be overgrown for good. I didn't hate her, I just didn't trust her. The next Friday brought a letter from the court, official this time, confirming the denial of guardianship and noting that any future petition would require substantial new evidence. It was a formality, but a satisfying one, stamped and sealed with the authority Lily and Jason had tried to weaponize. I put it in the safe next to my trust documents, its edges sharp against the softer papers inside. Robert called later that day just to check in, and I told him I was fine, better than fine. "That's what winning feels like," he said. "Not dramatic, just clean and clear." We didn't stay on the phone long. There was nothing more to plan, nothing urgent to contain. But before hanging up, he added, "If they ever try to reappear with another story, Eleanor, don't even answer the door. You've given them every chance to walk back toward decency." "And they chose shortcuts instead," I replied. "Exactly." On Saturday morning, I went to the farmer's market for the first time in months. Wearing the green scarf Tom used to say brought out my eyes. I bought too many tomatoes, a dozen fresh eggs, and a loaf of rosemary sourdough I didn't need but craved all the same. A few people stopped to say hello, and no one asked if I was okay, which felt like the greatest kindness of all. I ran into Pastor Elaine near the honey stall, and she greeted me with a smile that held more knowing than questions. "We missed you at service," she said, "but I'm glad to see you." "I needed some time," I told her. "You took the time you needed," she replied, gently correcting the implication. "That's what matters." I bought a jar of lavender honey from the booth beside hers and walked home through the park, the bag heavy on my arm, but my steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. The house felt more like mine now than it had in years. Not because anything had changed, but because nothing else was being taken. I opened the windows, watered the potted basil on the kitchen sill, and played an old jazz record Tom had loved. The air smelled like rosemary bread and warm wood, and for a moment I danced a little, quietly, like I used to when no one was watching. I paused once, catching my reflection in the hallway mirror, silver-haired, soft-eyed, not fragile, just older. Still here, still me. The woman staring back wasn't confused or incapable or in decline. She was just tired of proving things to people who never bothered to listen. I smiled at her and nodded once, like we'd agreed on something only we needed to understand. And then I went back to the kitchen, where the kettle was just starting to whistle. Sunday brought another message from Lily, but this time it was a voicemail I didn't expect. Her voice was quieter, less polished, and there was no background noise, just her breath, measured and strained. "Hi, Mom," she began, then paused long enough that I thought the recording had ended. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Not for how it turned out, but for how it began. I think I forgot who you were. I think I convinced myself that fear justified control, and I was wrong." Another pause, then softer. "I know you don't trust me. I don't even know if I trust myself. But I wanted you to hear it, at least once." The message ended, without a plea for contact, without promises of change, and that made it more real than anything she'd said in years. I saved the voicemail but didn't call back. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there, suspended like a candle with a burned wick, not lit, not discarded, just there. I didn't know what would happen next, and for once, I didn't need to. I'd learned to live with the unknown, to trust the quiet strength that came from choosing myself without apology. The war for control had ended not in a bang, but in a breath, and I had won, not because I crushed them, but because I had refused to be erased. That was enough. For now, and maybe forever. 1 week later, I stood in my garden trimming the overgrown lavender bush when I noticed a small envelope wedged between the slats of my front gate. It wasn't mailed, just left there, no name on the front, but the handwriting was unmistakably Lily's. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to open it, burn it, or leave it for the wind to take. In the end, I slipped it into the pocket of my gardening apron and went back to pruning, the scent of crushed herbs mingling with the quiet tremble in my chest. I finished tending the lavender, rinsed my hands at the spigot, and sat on the back porch with the envelope resting on my knee like a weight that didn't quite belong. When I finally opened it, the note inside was short. No requests, no explanations, just thank you for stopping it before I became someone I wouldn't recognize. My hands didn't shake, but something inside me shifted. Something like release, or maybe relief. It wasn't a bridge, but it wasn't another matchstick either. I showed the letter to Robert the next day, mostly because I didn't know what to do with it. He read it once, folded it carefully, and handed it back without commentary. "It's not an admission of guilt," he said, "but it's close enough to regret to matter." I nodded, fingers tracing the edge of the page. "I don't think she's coming back," I said softly, not as who she was, not as who I hoped she'd be. Robert didn't argue. "Sometimes survival means grieving the living," he said, and the simplicity of the truth left no room for fantasy. I tucked the note into the same file where I kept the voicemail, not out of sentiment, but as part of the record. Maybe one day it would help me remember the whole story, the love, the loss, the line I finally refused to cross. And maybe, just maybe, it would remind Lily who I'd been before she tried to overwrite me. Spring came early that year, and with it, a sense of normalcy I hadn't trusted in months. Miriam visited again with a suitcase full of yarn and a plan to teach me how to knit, insisting it was good for the joints and the soul. We sat on the porch most afternoons, the two of us slowly mastering the rhythm of cast on, knit, purl, repeat. We didn't talk much about Lily or Jason anymore, not out of avoidance, but because some wounds didn't need to be pressed every day to be felt. Instead, we laughed about our childhood, cursed when we dropped stitches, and debated the merits of oat milk versus real cream in tea. It was easy, and ease had become something rare and sacred. Occasionally, Miriam would glance at the gate like she expected Lily to walk through it, but she never said so aloud. I appreciated the restraint. Love, I was learning, didn't always require proximity. It just needed to stop hurting long enough to breathe. One Saturday in April, Pastor Elaine asked me to speak at the church's Elder Independence Seminar, an event I hadn't attended since Tom's passing. "Your story might help someone," she said over the phone, and I hesitated. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I didn't know how to share it without bleeding in public. "Just tell the truth," she added gently, "and let them decide what to do with it." I agreed, more curious than brave, and spent the next week writing a short speech, careful not to name names but deliberate in naming patterns. When the day came, I wore the green scarf again and stood at the podium in a room of strangers who already knew too much. I told them how concern could become a cage, how love, when weaponized, didn't feel like protection. It felt like erasure. I told them about notes slipped across desks, voices raised behind smiles, and the slow unraveling of trust disguised as planning. And I told them that freedom, once reclaimed, was something you never surrendered again. When I finished, no one clapped right away, but every head nodded. After the seminar, 3 women and 1 man approached me in quiet succession, each with a story that sounded eerily familiar. One had been signed into a care facility without consent. Another had lost control of her pension after her son became her financial advocate. The man said his niece had slowly taken over his passwords, saying it was just to help. I listened, gave them Robert's name when they asked, and reminded them, as someone had once reminded me, that fear doesn't make control noble. It just makes it effective. Angela from the bank even showed up unannounced, hugging me tight and telling me she was proud, though neither of us ever said why. We both knew. We'd seen the worst in people who called themselves family, and we'd lived to draw boundaries with our full names intact. That was worth more than applause. By June, I had returned to the rhythms of a life that felt solid under my feet. The garden bloomed, the neighborhood kids helped me with groceries sometimes, and Miriam was deep into her 4th scarf, despite Napa's mild weather. Occasionally, I'd see Lily's car on the far end of town, never close, never parked, just passing like a shadow that hadn't quite figured out where it belonged anymore. She never reached out again, not directly, and that was fine. Some bridges didn't need to burn, but they didn't need to be crossed either. I had peace. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but peace, all the same. Late one evening, as the cicadas hummed and the sky burned orange behind the hills, I found myself writing something I hadn't planned, a letter to no one, or maybe to myself. You are right to be afraid. Aging isn't easy, and trust becomes more fragile when the world starts speaking to you like you're fading. But you are not fading. You are choosing. You are still here. And as long as you're here, your story is yours alone to write. I folded the letter and tucked it inside the back of my journal. Not a warning, not a legacy, just a reminder. And so if you're watching this, or listening, or reading what I've left behind, know this. I was never lost. I was buried, and I dug my way out with a pen, a lawyer, and the unwavering belief that age is not the same thing as surrender. If you find yourself in that same kind of quiet war, where concern is a disguise and family forgets your voice, there's a way out. It won't be fast, it won't be easy, but it will be yours. Because, like I told them at the bank that day, in a whisper behind the smile, this is not my choice. But fighting back, that absolutely is. If you have a similar story about betrayal from the people you least expect, tell us in the comments and don't forget to subscribe.